Howdy YouTube, and welcome to this episode of the Gunman. So this video here, I'll be taking you guys through the paintwork on this Audi S5. The name of the color is Panther Black. The paint code is LZ9Z. And we're going to be using Standox solvent-based base coat. We'll then be using some Standox standard clear over the top. Now I did zoom in on the back edge of that door because when I was doing my prep, there was big sausages built up on every single panel. Basically what happened there is the previous people to paint it put the paint on a little bit too heavy, and there was sort of big build-ups on the edge of each panel, so I made sure I did sand them out. And yeah, when I do my prep work, as you guys mostly know, I sand the entire panel down with some 600 grit, and that will remove any nibs, any poor orange peel. Also, I can focus on those edges and make sure that I remove any subpar paintwork before I go and put my paint over the top. As I've mentioned in some other videos, back in the day, all we used to do was actually sand our primed areas, and then we would just sort of scotch bright the surrounding areas. But if there's bits of crap under there or there's poor paintwork, you're effectively going over the top of that. Whereas when we use our 600 grit, we're able to actually remove that and get down to a nice flat substrate before we go and paint over the top of it. You may have noticed on that door there too, there was a darker patch of primer, and that was just some UV primer. I did block that door down with some 180 grit. It ended up blocking through to a bit of filler and a bit of bare steel there, so I did end up re-priming it with the good old trusty UV primer. It's great stuff that you get a really nice build from it. It dries quickly, it's safe with your solvent-based paint, so you're not going to go and get shrink back or anything like that when you go over the top of it, and ideal for a purpose like that. As long as the sun's shining, it's a good day to use the UV primer. There are some UV curing lights that you can use, but we don't have that. But yeah, the UV primer that we use, you don't actually specifically need that light for. Whereas I do know that the Axalta one, they recommend using the light, but that's pretty expensive. I've heard like even around $10,000 just for the light to cure their primer. So it turns into a bit of an expensive thing when we can just use the Metalux one. And the primer itself is expensive. I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. If you're using waterborne, it may not even be worth it. Like when I was working in a waterborne shop, we used to just use a bit of the 1K aerosol primer, and that was fine. It did the purpose for like little cut throughs and stuff like that. Anything that needed a bit more of a block, you just put some 2-pack primer on it, use the infrared lights, block it back, and continue on with the job. But I'm still using my Sagola 4600 Xtreme DVR Aqua is the air cap I've got on it, 1.3mm. Totally loving this gun. It gets a nice amount of material out, especially in the warmer months. I think I mentioned it in the previous video. You want to get a nice amount of paint out per pass. Yeah, if you're not getting enough paint out, well, then it can start drying up, and when you go to paint over it, it'll just start balling up, and then it'll effectively end up being bits of crap in the final finish of paintwork. A colour like this is dark enough. While it does have a little bit of metallic and some pearl in there, it's dark enough for me to not need any blending aid. Blending clear, I've usually called it. Wet bed, they call it in the USA. But yeah, colour like this, I was pretty confident that I didn't need that. That is obviously why I didn't use it. There was another car I did recently, and I made a video on that BMW 420i. That colour was sort of borderline. I may have got away with it, but yeah, as I said, sort of if I'm ever unsure, I'll just use it. But this one, 100% confident that I'll be able to blend it without any blending aid. But I did just make sure I gave it a good tack rag over the edges before I did put any clear coat down. And a lot of the time, that's all I will do when I do tack rag prior to clearing. It's just tack ragging where your overspray's landed, where your base coat is already sitting. I've found most of the time you don't even actually need to re-tack rag over the top of it, especially in the colder months. If it is like a little bit tacky still, you go and tack rag over it. You can actually have your tack rag sort of start to mark it. And that's probably part of the reason why I don't usually tack rag where I've fully coloured. So these panels here, these small parts here, and the door that was off the car didn't need a tack cloth. Just those blend areas that needed a tack cloth. I only mixed up like 200 mils of colour for this job, and as it turns out, you'll see in a minute, I was checking how much I had when I finished the job, and I just scraped through. So yeah, 200 mils is enough for this job. I would probably recommend, if it was like my apprentice doing this car, I'd say just go 250 up to even possibly 300 mils. But I know that this colour covers really well, and I can save a little bit of money for the boss by using minimal materials. A lot of people seem to have the attitude, well, I'm not paying for it, therefore why should I give a shit? I'm just going to go mix up 300 mils. But the way I see it, that's 100 mils I've saved on this job, that's $10. You do that on every single job for a year, that's a lot of money. And at the end of the day, the boss is going to look at the bigger picture. When you go for a pay rise and he says, well, ever since the Gunman started working here, our profits have been up and our material usage has been down. So you go into the boss and say, mate, I want another $100 a week. You know, I've done a pretty good year's work. What do you reckon? He'll have a think about it and he'll say, well, you know what? We're doing better since you've been back. So yeah, you know what? We'll do it. Or even come halfway. We'll give you $50 a week extra. But that's the way I've always looked at that kind of thing, and it's not the fact that, well, he didn't see that, you know, he didn't know that I mixed up an extra 300 mils of clear and tipped it down the drain and it was at the end of the day. That's not the attitude I have, and I don't think it's a good attitude to have, although some people do have that attitude. The spray gun I'm using, again, is the Walcom Genisi Carbonio 360, the 1.3 mil clear setup is what I've got on it. Pretty good gun. It's on the pricier side of spray guns. It's nearly up there with the starter jets. It's quite a bit more expensive than the Pro Lights, which I'm a big fan of. Big part of the reason I've been such a big fan of the Pro Lights for so long is that they just seem to strike that balance between quality build, awesome finish, and affordability. So it's still going to be, like, the Pro Light's going to be the #1 gun in my top 10, and if I was to redo that top 10 spray guns, I would leave it fairly similar. I would probably include things like the Sagola 4600. I really did have a lot of fun using them, although I've dropped off using that clear gun a little bit lately, just for the simple reason that, I don't know, I've got this gun for starters, and I did start using the Pro Light again and I was really enjoying using it. Even little things that you may or may not have taken too much note of, like the positioning of the car or even the positioning of the door itself. You can see how the car is sort of slightly off to the angle, and that's partly because you can actually see the airflow in this spray booth. It's going towards that end of the booth, and it comes in from the other end where the doors are, and then it goes down to the back end of the booth. And any overspray that was to, say, land on this door here could possibly build up, and as I was saying before, it can build up on there and turn into bits of crap when you go into paint. So that's why I've actually turned it around the other way, so that it's not facing the the overspray that's possibly going to land on it. And I also have the car on that slight angle, so that the air that's rushing in from the booth is not going to be landing directly onto that panel. I found that when I do have panels facing the fan, you can end up getting little tiny bits of silicon or whatever, and it can start solvent popping. However, little things like this can actually make all the difference to not having some of those sort of reactions. But at the end of the day, every booth has their own little quirks. So yeah, you just got to figure them out, and sometimes it just takes trial and error. It's like, will you try this? No, that didn't work. I'll try it the other way around. Yep, well, I'm getting better results doing that. Keep doing it. And if the results are improved, well then, yeah, just find what works for you. So you probably noticed I did give it a probably minute flash off time, but all that was literally the time it took me to get from the first panel around and back around in a circle, and then I went straight away. With this clear, I can go basically straight away, like the tack and whack method. This technically probably isn't quite tack and whack because I did give it a slight amount of flash off time. I just decided to, why not? But yeah, you don't really have to when you're using the Standox standard clear. Most HS and VOC clears are able to be used with the tack and whack method. I've got some great results with it, but yeah, just be warned, if you stuff up when you're doing it, it's not my fault. Maybe it would be a good idea to get a paint rep, a technical rep in, if you want to give that method a shot. And yeah, like the first time I used it, I was like a fish to water, so to speak. I'd never done it before. This guy showed me, or he actually basically told me in principle. He was standing there next to me. He was a paint rep from Glazeret back in the day. It was like 2009 or 10. And he told me gun setup and all that. I went, bang, this is amazing, man. Where has this been all my life? You know, because previous to that, I struggled with the thicker HS clears, and I really struggled with the HBLP air caps. So yeah, having that guy, Tim was his name, from over in Melbourne at Colourtech ART, and it was really helpful. And yeah, just a good person to get some knowledge of. I've never been one who's shy to ask a question, especially when I'm not sure on something, and I've been like that since I'm a kid. I was always asking my dad loads of questions. I've always been very inquisitive. My father is actually a house painter by trade. He did that quite a lot in his younger years. He was painting buildings, like he was hanging off cranes on high-rise buildings, painting the cranes back in the 70s and that. He then continued his career to be a teacher. So in many ways I did actually sort of follow in his footsteps, and yeah, so even on the teaching side of things with my dad, he's history and English high school teacher, so I think I've probably even picked up on some of the teaching methods of my father, and also the love for making shit look good. I was always out on the job site helping my dad out. Since 5-6 years old we were out on job sites. We were doing house restoration back in those days. I'd make myself $5 an hour, and I absolutely love spending time with my dad. We'd do paint stripping of whole houses. One of my earliest memories of working with my dad was with a heat gun in the hand and just removing all these layers of paint from someone's bathroom. We'd have the music on, we'd sit down and have a can of Sprite or something like that with a sausage and bread at morning tea, or whatever it be. The owner of the house might come up with with some tea or something like that, and it was just good days, happy days, mate. So I've always been into work. I've never been shy of a hard day's work. I've done some really, really hard days work. Like I did a year over in the mines over here in WA in the remote Western Australian desert, and look, a day spraying cars is a good day. Working your ass off in the sun in a remote WA mine, that is not fun. And it was actually in part having that year off and coming back to spray painting which made me love it so much again, and that was actually when I decided to start making this YouTube channel, because it reinvigorated my love and my passion for this trade. I know I did start wandering off the subject a little bit there to the end. It turned into a little bit of a vlog and a bit of a history lesson, but that's what you get when you subscribe to the Gunman. I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, give it a big thumbs up, leave a comment down below. You can check out my website through the links at the end. There's a link to my shop. Now you've seen this video, get out there and paint some shit. Thanks for watching, and this has been another Gunman production. Goodbye.